The desert was never quiet. The twin suns burned the sky into a pale amber color, and the wind wouldn't move. But the earth itself whispered metallic echoes buried in the sand, memories of battles that never really ended. The rusty hulls of starships stuck out of the dunes like skeletal remains. Every so often, the mechanic known only as Eli would hear them groan as the heat made their bones grow. Eli used to hate the noise. It made him think of who he used to be before he forgot, a long time ago. He was a soldier, not a very brave one, not a leader, not a name that people sing about in the halls of heroes. He was just a soldier who could fix things faster than most people could break them. The brass liked to call him an asset, but after the war, assets were no longer needed. Soldiers were sent home. Medals were turned into coins, and Eli was sent home with a pat on the back and a warning. Keep your head down and don't look back. He had done just that. Eli had lived for 16 years at the edge of the desert in a broken-down hangar made of scrap alien steel. He repaired whatever came his way, like broken farm bots, power converters, and even the occasional smuggler's thruster ray. He didn't talk to anyone unless they paid him, and even then he didn't say much. But there was one memory Eli couldn't bury in the sand, and one night he could never forget. The night he rescued the girl. The siege of Uranus had been 12 cycles ago. That night, the desert was loud. The wind howled, and raider ships cut through the clouds like wolves looking for strays. Eli didn't want to get involved. He didn't. But when a figure stumbled toward his hangar, wings burned and eyes wide with fear, he made a choice he shouldn't have made. The girl was not a person. The emergency lights made her scales shimmer faintly. They were deep sapphire blue with silver cracks running through them. Her wings were ripped and bleeding, but her face was too young. Eli remembered how her golden eyes locked onto him, begging without saying a word, even as aliens with weapons came down. He should have left. The war taught him that those who didn't act like a hero were the ones who lived. But there was something in her look that made him stop. Maybe it was because she looked like every child the war had let down. Maybe Eli was just tired of being a coward. He took the plasma cutter off of his workbench. Eli fought again for the first time since he got out of jail. He never found out what the girl's name was. He only knew that the raiders were dead by dawn. His hangar was in ruins, and the dragon girl had disappeared into the desert with only a whispered promise. I won't forget you, but promises made in fear and fire weak. A long time is 16 years. Eli had long since convinced himself that she had forgotten him, just like the galaxy had. Ellie's peace was broken again as the suns went down. He was bent over a repulsor lift generator, his hands covered in grease, when a shadow passed over his hangar. It wasn't the kind of shadow that birds in the desert make. This was more mechanical and sharp. A boat. Eli looked through the dirty window with his eyes squinted. The craft that was coming down wasn't a smuggler's scrap heap or a raider's sharp fang. It was smooth and sharp, and it had the logo of the Unified Star Command on it. Eli thought that group had fallen apart after the last war. As it landed outside, its thrusters kicked up a storm of sand. Ellie's chest felt tight. He hadn't seen military patches in more than 10 years. And whoever got off the ship didn't come here to fix things. The ramp opened with a hiss. A tall, commanding figure walked out, covered in obsidian armor with red veins of energy running through it. The wind in the desert caught on a pair of huge, sleek, scaled, and strong wings. And her eyes, gold. The mechanic stopped moving, and the spanner fell from his hands. The girl with the dragon. But she wasn't a girl anymore. 16 years had made her more than human, more than a story. She moved like a knife pulled from the fire, sharp and unyielding. There were soldiers in black and silver behind her, but she was the one who caught everyone's attention. She was the one who made the desert quiet. She looked round the hangar, then the desert, And finally Eli. For a brief moment, the others fell away, and he saw the hurt child he had once protected. But then she spoke, and her voice was strong again. Mechanic Eli from the Uranus outpost. Her voice was short and official, but there was an undertone that only he could hear. Recognition. Eli gulped. His throat was as dry as the ground under his boots. Haven't heard that in a long time. A lot of people just call me Scrap Rat now. Something flashed across her face. Maybe amusement or disbelief. You saved me once, she said. 16 years ago. Aliens would have taken me. You fought when you didn't have to. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. He thought the memory was fading into myth, but it had been living inside her all along. And now, he asked in a low voice, why are you here? The commander, not the dragon woman, moved closer. Her wings were folded neatly behind her, but the shadow they cast over him was huge. Because the war isn't over, and I want you. The desert seemed to be holding its breath. Eli laughed, but it was short and bitter. Me, you must be wrong. I'm not a soldier anymore. I fix engines, patch leaks, and keep the rusted-out boats of smugglers running long enough for them to get shot down. You need warriors and commanders, not a mechanic who has seen better days. Her golden eyes looked right through him. I need someone I can trust. The words hurt him more than any plasma blast. Have faith in his world. It was a currency that had been dead for a long time. He didn't know how much he missed it until he heard it again. But fear still clawed at him. I've moved on from that life. No matter what war you're in. The first time, I barely made it. She tilted her head to look at him closely. You think living and surviving are the same thing? Eli didn't know what to say. The commander turned a little to signal to her troops. One of them stepped up and turned on a holoprojector. Blue light crackled through the air, making a picture of a huge fleet of alien warships that looked like serrated knives and blocked out stars. They've come back, she said, her voice steady but full of weight. Those raiders you fought that night were just scouts. The Scourge Armada has come back together. They've already burned down 3 colonies. Every world must kneel or die, they say. Eli looked at the holo. His stomach was churning. He thought that the nightmares of the past were buried with the wreckage that was all over the desert. But the enemy had never been beaten, only put off. What's that got to do with me? Even though he tried not to. His voice broke. The commander got close enough to see the faint lines of scales on her temples and the fire flickering in her eyes. Because I'm not just their enemy. I'm their target. And the only reason I lived long enough to fight them now is because of you. Her hand, which was both armored and graceful, reached out to him. Come with me, Eli. Not as a soldier, not like a hero, as the only person who ever chose to protect a scared child when no one else would. That man is needed by the galaxy again. The wind in the desert howled through the broken walls of the hangar. Eli looked at her hand and the choice it gave him. 16 years of silence, greasy nights, and half-remembered memories fell apart around him like dust. He wanted to tell her she was wrong and that he wasn't that man anymore. But deep down, under the scars of war and regret, his spark began to grow. It's possible that people had forgotten about him, but not by her, and maybe that meant he wasn't done yet. Eli reached out. He held her armored hand with his greasy one. And just like that, the mechanic's time away was over. The war had come back to him. Eli remembered military ships being warmer inside than this one. Not in a physical way, its climate controls worked perfectly, but in a spiritual way. Once, ships of the unified Star Command were full of soldiers talking, the smell of oil and burnt coffee, and the restless energy of men and women who thought they were protecting something worth dying. For this ship was not the same. Not a word. Exact. Every soldier he passed moved like clockwork, with no wasted motion or idle talk. Their eyes didn't stay on him for long, but when they did, Eli could feel their judgment. He was like grease and rust in a sea of polished steel. The commander walked ahead with calm confidence, as if they were part of the machine. Her wings fit perfectly into her armor. She was more than just a leader to the soldiers. She was their fire and their symbol. Eli thought about how many of them knew she had been a scared girl bleeding in the desert. He tried not to look, but the memory was still fresh after 16 years. As they walked, flashes of the night he saved her came back to him, sparks from his plasma cutter, the smell of Raider blood, and her wide-eyed fear. And now, she was a commander who acted like she could command the stars themselves. They got to the strategy chamber, which was a round room with a holotable in the middle that was glowing. As she got closer, the projection changed. It showed flickering pictures of star maps, enemy formations, and colonies that had turned trash. Ellie's stomach turned. The Scourge Armada's symbol was sharp and scary, and it glared back at him. He had prayed that he would never see it again. The commander waved her soldiers away, leaving just the two of them in the room. Her posture relaxed for the first time since she got there. "You haven't changed much," she said quietly, with a hint of a smile. Eli snorted. 16 years of sand and trash don't do much for a man. You, on the other hand, are not the scared kid I remember. Her golden eyes blinked. I didn't have the time to be scared. There was silence between them, broken only by the hum of the holotable. Then she asked, "Do you wish you hadn't done it? That night, you saved me." Eli looked at her and saw the fire in her eyes, and the weight of command in the way she stood. He shook his head, even though he was scared and the wall was coming like a storm. Not even for a second. She let out a slow breath, as if she was relieved to get an answer she hadn't known she needed. The holotable moved again, showing the outline of a huge shipyard circling a dead star. "This," she said, pointing to the skeleton structure, "is where the Scourge are making their fleet. We know where they get their supplies. But their defenses are unlike anything Command has ever seen. We need someone who knows how to work with old machines and systems that most of our engineers won't even touch. That's where you come in." Eli blinked. "You're telling me to, what? Get into their shipyard and mess with their toys?" Her mouth turned into something that looked dangerously close to a smile. "Exactly." He rubbed his head. "You know, I quit all of this for a reason. I'm not a secret agent. I fix bots for farms. I weld hulls together. You live," she said. She spoke sharply, but not meanly. "You've done it before. You will do it again. And this time, you won't be by yourself. Hold on a second. If you like this story, stay with us." Eli and the commander are about to face a lot more danger. The mission brief came quickly. Eli didn't like it because it was too fast. In just a few hours, he was in a pressurized exo-rig, looking at the stars through the dropship's viewport. Soldiers round him checked their guns in silence and with speed. He felt like an old tool that had been taken out of a drawer because nothing more would do. The commander stood at the front, not moving as the stars flew by. She was so magnetic that even when she didn't say anything, she held the whole unit together. Eli wondered if she ever let herself feel fear again, or if being a leader had completely burned it out of her. The dropship shook as it flew through the debris field around the shipyard. Hulks of destroyed ships floated like tombstones, and broken armor plates floated silently through the void. The sight hit Eli in the chest. He had been to battlefields before, but the quiet of space always made it worse. Death didn't rot here. It just stayed forever. The commander spoke up and broke the silence. "We'll be there in 5. Eli is in charge of sabotage once we're inside. Do everything you can to keep him safe. If he fails, we'll do." A lot of helmets nodded. "No doubt, no doubt." Eli swallowed hard. He wanted to say something to them to remind them that he wasn't a soldier anymore, but the weight of their trust kept him quiet. "There was a lot of noise when we landed. Scourge drones came down like a swarm of steel bugs, their red eyes shining in the dark. Plasma fire lit up the empty space. with blue and red streaks crashing into each other and explosions shaking the dropship. "Get moving," the commander yelled, and her wings flared as she jumped into the fight. Her sword lit up, sending a beam of molten gold through drones like they were paper. Behind her, soldiers spread out and fired in controlled bursts, making sure each shot hit its target. Eli was the last to leave, and he held onto his toolbox like it was a lifeline. Drones came at them from all sides, but the soldiers somehow, against all odds, held the line. The commander was everywhere at once, cutting, burning, and protecting. Eli forgot for a moment that she was the same girl he had once carried through fire. She was the very definition of rage. But even rage couldn't last forever. She yelled, "Eli," and pointed to a small maintenance hatch in the shipyard's hull. "Go now." His legs moved before his brain caught up. He ran across the docking bay, his heart racing and plasma bolts sizzling past his ears. He jumped into the hatch and shut it behind him with a bang. The shipyard was worse than he thought it would be. The hallway smelled like burnt metal and chemical coolant. The walls pulsed softly, as if they were alive. Scourge technology had always mixed machines and living things in ways that made Ellie's skin crawl. He followed the diagram that was loaded into his visor, going through endless hallways until he got to the power core chamber. He couldn't move when he saw it. In the middle of the room, a huge reactor pulsed, held up by skeletal frames made of bone like alloy. There were dozens of Scourge engineers, if you could call them that, hanging on to the structure. Their arms were too long, and their eyes were too empty. Ellie's hand shook as he took out his tools. He had no weapon but his mind and no armor but what he knew. But when he looked at the alien core, something inside him moved. It was only a machine. Scary, strange, but still a machine. The machines broke, and he knew how to break them. He got to work. It felt like hours passed in minutes, as he rewired conduits, bypassed circuits, and planted charges in places that most engineers wouldn't even think to look. Sweat dripped down his helmet. The Scourge workers hissed and clicked nearby, but they didn't see him because they were too busy with their work and didn't expect him to sabotage them. Finally, the last charge turned green. Eli let out a shaky breath. He whispered into his comm, "It's done." But before the commander could answer, a loud growl filled the room. Eli turned, his heart racing. A figure twice his height came out of the shadows, wearing jagged black armor and eyes that burned like molten coals. A warlord of the Scourge. Eli was stuck, though the charges were set. "Commander," he said, backing away as the warlord came closer. "We have a problem." Static crackled in his ear before her voice came through, clear and steady. "Hold on. Eli, I'm on my way." The warlord swung, and a sword made of bone and fire cut through the air. Eli dove to the side, and tools flew all over the floor. He felt panic in his chest, but adrenaline pushed it down. He grabbed the closest thing, a plasma torch, and lit it just in time to block another blow. The force shook his bones and almost knocked him down. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't in the army, but he lived through it. And right now, staying alive meant waiting for her to show up. Don't leave, because what happens next will change everything for Eli, the commander, and the whole war against the Scourge. The Scourge warlord's steps sounded like hammer blows in the room. Every step made Ellie's spine tingle. Not only was the thing armored, it was made to fight. Its frame was thick with muscle and jagged plates, and its claws glowed faintly, as if molten heat was flowing beneath the surface. Ellie's plasma torch sputtered in his hand. It was barely more than a welding tool compared to the living mountain in front of him. The warlord turned its head and looked at him with the patience of a predator. When it finally spoke, its voice was a low, rough sound that echoed off the walls. "Human, you are not important." Ellie's mouth got dry. He muttered, Yeah. Well, as he changed how he held the torch, "You wouldn't be the first to underestimate me," the warlord dumped. The bone and fire blade cut through the air, making Eli dive to the side. The hit destroyed the platform behind him, and molten pieces fell from the sky. Eli got up quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind told him to run, but there was no place to go. The warlord swung again. Eli raised the torch in a desperate attempt to block. Sparks flew when the makeshift weapon hit him just right to miss his head, but the blow sent him rolling across the floor. He hit the housing of the reactor hard with his back. His back hurt. The warlord moved forward, enjoying the kill. "Come on, Eli," he hissed to himself, making his hands, which were shaking, hold the torch more tightly. "Think you are not a soldier. You are an engineer, so use your engineering skills to get out of this." He looked quickly up at the reactor above. There were machines everywhere, conduits, coolant lines, and unstable energy cells. Things he could use. The warlord lunged again, bringing the blade down. Eli rolled under the blow, and sparks flew as the weapon cut a glowing trench in the metal floor. He got up quickly, and the torch hissed. The warlord growled. "You should have stayed forgotten." Eli spit blood onto the floor. "I guess I'm not good at that." The doors to the chamber hissed open. The room was filled with golden light. The leader, she fell like a storm, wings spread wide, and her blade lit up with a roar. Her soldiers spread out behind her, but it was her presence that stopped the warlord in his tracks. "Step away from him," she said, her voice full of power and fire. The warlord growled and narrowed its eyes. "So the baby bird lived. I will fix that error." Her face showed rage, but her blade stayed steady. "You won't touch him again." Ellie's chest got tight. She remembered. That night hadn't gone away after 16 years. The warlord yelled and charged, leaving Eli to fight the commander in a storm of sparks and flames. When their blades hit, arcs of molten energy sliced through the air. With each blow, the chamber shook. Eli couldn't keep up with their fast and brutal fight. He pushed himself against the reactor housing, feeling both awe and fear. She fought like fire, her wings sending out arcs of light and her blade shining like a golden sun against the warlord's shadow. But even though she fought him with the same intensity, Eli saw the truth. The warlord was stronger. Every fight pushed her back. She couldn't win by herself. Eli. Her voice cut through the noise, strained but strong. "Are the charges ready?" His eyes went straight to the blinking detonators that were wired all over the reactor. Set. But if it went off now, it would kill them all. He shook his head. "We won't survive if I set them off now." Even as she blocked a brutal blow, her eyes were locked on him. "Then show us the way out." It was crazy, not possible, but Eli was best at being crazy. He ran to the closest control console, avoiding debris as the fight raged behind him. He ripped into the alien systems with his fingers flying, skipping codes and changing the flow of power. The skirt tech fought back, making sparks and static sounds, but Eli knew how machines worked. He always did, and no matter how advanced or strange they were, they all broke the same way. He got what he needed: a system to clean up the coolant that was connected to the emergency vents in the hangar bay. He could blow open an exit just as the charges went off if he overloaded it. Dangerous. It's possible that it's not possible, but it was the only chance. He yelled, "Commander," over the noise. "Give me 60 seconds." Her sword locked with the warlord's, and sparks flew everywhere. "You have 30. Eli worked like crazy, as he connected circuits in ways that the people who made them never intended. His torch hissed. His hands shook, not because he was scared, but because he had to hurry. Every second wasted was a second the commander bled. The battle behind him got worse. The warlord slammed her into the reactor housing, and her armor was scratched by his claws. She shot fire from her wings at him, burning his face, but it took a lot of energy. She staggered, and for a moment her blade went out. "Come on, Eli," she said with a gasp. Then the system turned green. He yelled, "I've got it." The warlord turned to face him, sensing the change. It lunged with a roar, its blade raised to cut him in two. Eli slammed the control for the purge. The reactor yelled. Energy rushed through the pipes, sending coolant vapor flying in all directions. The force made a loud crack that blew open the hangar's emergency vents, making a loud escape tunnel of light and smoke. At the same time, the commander let loose everything she had left. Her sword glowed brighter than ever before, and with a scream that shook the room, she drove it through the warlord's chest. The beast howled and thrashed, trying to get to her, but she pushed the blade deeper, and her wings burst into flames. Before the fire burned it all up, the warlord's roar turned into a gurgling hiss. It turned to ash. The commander fell to one knee. Her armor burned and her breathing heavy. As the charges began their final countdown, Eli rushed to her side and helped her up. "We have to go right now." They all stumbled toward the vent tunnel, where the bright light of freedom was waiting for them. The shipyard shook violently, and the reactor was seconds away from blowing up. Her arm got tighter around his shoulders. "Don't let go." "I won't," he said. And then the world went crazy. The explosion sent them flying into space. Ellie's stomach dropped for a second as the void swallowed them, but then the dropship's grappling lines snapped tight, pulling them in. As the shipyard blew up behind them in a huge explosion of fire and broken metal, soldiers rushed to get them on board. The shockwave spread through the stars like a supernova, showing that the Scourge Armada would not back down. The doors of the dropship closed, blocking out the sound of destruction. Eli fell to the ground, his heart racing and his lungs working hard. The commander next to him pushed herself up, hurt but not broken. Even though she was tired, her golden eyes were still blazing as she looked at him. "You did it," she said softly. Eli chuckled weakly. "No, we did it." She smiled for the first time since they got back together. Not the smirk that made her look like she was in charge of her soldiers. A smile that is real. The girl he had saved smiled at him. Eli knew two things for sure at that moment. 1. The war had just started. 2. He would never leave again. The destruction of the shipyard was like a thunderclap that shook the whole sector. Scourge raiding parties had been roaming round for weeks, spreading fear from one system to the next. But something had changed in the wreckage that was still burning round a dead star. The Scourge had bled for the first time in years. The Unified Star Command sent out news of the victory on all of their channels. "The Scourge Armada is not unbeatable," the message said. "We will not give up. We won't fall." But inside the dropship that had just barely escaped the explosion, victory tasted much worse. Eli sat on the cold deck with his head in his hands as the adrenaline left his body. His arms hurt from holding the commander up, and his ears still rang from the blast. Soldiers round him cheered and nodded in agreement. This was just another mission for them, and they did well. Eli thought it was a miracle that he was still alive. The commander stood tall even though she was tired and her armor was cracked and her wings were burned. She didn't smile when the soldiers cheered or enjoy their respect. She looked at the stars that were rushing past the window for a long time, as if she could see something that no one else could. Eli could see the truth in her eyes when they finally met. She wasn't having a good time. She was doing math, always doing math. Later, when the others were asleep, she went to the ship's maintenance bay to look for him. He was hunched over a servo motor that was only half broken, his hands moving on their own and his mind far away. "Back there, you saved us all," she said softly. Eli didn't look up. "I got lucky." "No," she said, moving closer. You thought about it differently. You saw a way that no one else could. That's not luck. That's just you. He sighed and put the motor down. I'm a mechanic. I fix holes. I keep things going long enough for them to break again. That's it. She tilted her head, and her golden eyes stayed the same. And yet you stood up to a warlord with only a torch. That's not just a mechanic. There was a long silence between them, full of memories that weren't spoken. Finally, Eli asked the question that had been bothering him since she got back. Why me? You now lead fleets. You could have hired any engineer in the whole galaxy. Why did you pull me out of the sand? For the first time, she lost her cool. She looked down and spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. You didn't have to save me, but you did. You let me become this. And I never forgot. Ellie's chest felt tight. 16 years of being alone and telling himself that night didn't mean anything fell apart in an instant. She hadn't just remembered. She had based her whole life on it. But before he could say anything, alarms went off. The ship shook violently, throwing them against the wall. There were red lights flashing across the bay. A voice over the radio yelled, "Multiple contacts. Scourge interceptors are coming in." Eli got up slowly, holding onto the railing. They followed us. The commander's face hardened, and fire came back to her eyes. No, they were waiting. Plasma bolts hit the hull again, shaking the deck. The sound of weapons charging filled the halls as soldiers rushed to their posts. The commander grabbed Ellie's arm and pulled him toward the command deck. She said, "This time, you're not staying behind." The viewport showed a nightmare. Half a dozen Scourge ships were all round them, like sleek predators circling their wounded prey. Their red lights shone like eyes in the dark, and their guns were aimed at the dropship. "Shields are failing," a soldier yelled. "Now, evasive maneuvers," the commander yelled, her voice cutting through the noise like steel. The dropship spun round violently to avoid streams of plasma fire, but it was clear that they wouldn't last long. Eli held onto the railing as his stomach twisted with each roll. He wasn't made for combat maneuvers anymore, if he ever was. But as he looked over the controls, a spark of recognition flashed in his mind. Systems that are old. Old styles. Scourge ships hadn't changed much since the war. He pushed past a shot pilot and his hands flew across the console. Your algorithm for targeting is old. They are guessing your vectors. Watch this. He changed the order of the ship's thrusters with a few quick keystrokes, which caused random bursts of movement that no Scourge computer could have predicted. The dropship shook in strange ways, but then the plasma fire shot by without hitting anything, missing by meters. The commander turned to look at him, and her face showed surprise. "You just," Eli finished with a grim, "gave us a fighting chance." The fight went on, brutal and unending. The dropship moved round and dodged, and the soldiers fired in controlled bursts. But the Scourge pushed harder, driving them toward the gravity well of a nearby moon. A soldier growled. "We can't run away from them forever." Eli said, "No," and his mind raced. "But we might not have to." He pointed to the moon's rough surface, which was full of craters. "If we go into those trenches, we can hide our signature. They'll lose us in the noise." The commander didn't think twice. "Do it." The dropship went down. Plasma fire lit up the sky behind them, but the ship was swallowed whole by the craters. For 10 minutes, they crawled through narrow canyons, and every turn made the whole feel like it would break apart. At last, silence. The Scourge ships flew over us, and the moon made it hard for their sensors to work. The crew let out a sigh. They had gotten away. For now. Later, when it was dark and quiet on the command deck, Eli looked at the stars. The wind didn't mean much. They knew where we were going to be. They weren't just on patrol. They were waiting. The commander's jaw tightened. "This means that there is a leak. Someone in command is telling them where we are." Eli felt a chill run down his spine when he read the words. He wanted to ignore it, but he knew she was right deep down. The Scourge were cruel, but they weren't dumb. Someone was giving them a hand. He looked at her. If that's true, then we've already been compromised. This war isn't just going on out there anymore. It's in here, too. She looked him in the eye and spoke in a low but steady voice. Then we look for the traitor, and when we do, we burn the rot out of command before it ruins everything we've worked for. Eli lay in his bunk that night, staring at the ceiling as the ship's hum filled the silence. He thought that the shipyard was the end of his exile, but now he knew it was just the start. The Scourge Armada wasn't the only enemy they had. There was a shadow in their own group. Eli knew deep down that the next battles would not only be fought in space, but also in the dark corners of trust and betrayal. He turned the plasma torch over in his hand, the same tool he had used to save a scared girl in the desert. It had made a connection with him 16 years ago that he didn't understand. Now, it was all that kept him connected to who he had been and who he might have to be again. Because the galaxy wanted more than just for him to live. It told him to fight. The wind outside Blackridge smelled like storms and oil. The industrial area was full of rusted cranes that looked like skeletal fingers against the thick smoky sky. Silas had been feeling something building for days. It was like the calm before a machine blew up. The dragon fleet was close by. He could feel it in his bones. Not just the low hum of the weather, but also the whisper of fate. Every mechanic's gut told him that the city's fragile peace was about to break. His welding torch made sparks fly inside the workshop. The mechanical exosuit was half finished in front of him. It was a rough but strong shell made of steel and old military plating, with hydraulic muscles all over it. It wasn't pretty. Nothing Silas built ever was, but it worked. And it was the only thing that kept him from going crazy. Sounds from the past. He leaned back, and sweat ran down his forehead. His hands were sore, calloused, and blackened from working for hours. Every time the hammer hit something or the torch hissed, he thought about that night 16 years ago, the night of the raid. The screams, the fire, and the girl with scales that shone in the dark, Kellen. The girl with the dragon that he had saved. The one who had come back as commander. Their paths had crossed again, like the snapping of magnetic fields, violent and unavoidable. But since she got back, she had been distant, figuring out. A leader now, with a duty to her fleet, her people, and her war. And yet, every time she looked at him for a long time, Silas swore he saw at the memory of that night. That weak spark of thanks and trust. But was it enough? Is this enough to stop the storm that was coming? The council's treachery, the city council chamber smelled like polished marble and corruption. Silas didn't go in very often, but when Kellen called him, he did what he was told. There were suits and uniforms all over the room, and men and women with carefully rehearsed faces. Their words dripped honey over daggers. Kellen stood at the front, her body stiff like carved steel. The light caught the subtle shimmer of dragon scales along her jawline, and her armor shone through her cloak. Kellen's voice echoed through the vaulted room. She said, "Blackridge can't stay neutral any longer. The raiders are getting back together. Their fleets are moving round the outer systems. This city will either fall into their hands or rise up next to the fleet. There is no way to meet in the middle." There were whispers in the room. The councillors looked at each other nervously and spoke in low but urgent tones. Finally, one of the council men, who was big and heavy with rings on every finger, stood up. "Commander, with all due respect, this city thrives on freedom. We can't promise to fight in your war. We put a target on every roof if we pick sides." Silas, with his greasy jacket leaning against the wall, mumbled to himself, "You already have a goal. You just can't see it." Kellen's look at him was sharp but approving. For a moment, Silas felt like they were friends again, standing together against the tide. But then another voice came through the room, a counselor with cold eyes and a sharper tongue. Or maybe, the man said as he slowly got up, we should talk to the raiders directly. The words hit the chamber like a knife. People gasped, Kellen's nostrils flared, and a thin stream of smoke came from her lips. Talk it over, she said, in a voice that was dangerously low. You mean give up? The man said without hesitation. Better surrender than die. Silas's fists got tighter. His gut told him something was wrong more than just being a coward or being involved in politics. The man wasn't talking out of fear. He was sure of what he was saying. There was already a deal. Smoke in the air. Blackridge burned that night. Just as Silas had always feared, the raiders came with fire. Their ships tore through the storm clouds like wolves going after a herd. The sirens screamed. The towers fell apart. Plasma fire turned the sky red. Silas stood in the street, and behind him in the workshop was his unfinished exosuit. Panic spread through the city like blood from a cut. The silver arcs of Kellen's dragon-forged starships roared overhead, firing at the raiders' formation. But the city wasn't ready. It was too weak and broken. Before the first shot was fired, the betrayal had torn them apart. Damn cowards, Silas growled as he pulled the last plate onto his machine. His hands shook, but not because he was scared. He was angry. You sold us out. The exosuit came to life with a low hum, and its hydraulics shook under the weight. The cockpit opened with a hiss and waited. Silas got in, and the steel closed round him like a second skin. It wasn't great. It wasn't finished, but it would have to work. This time, he wasn't just saving one girl. He was saving all of them. A battle starts. Again the streets of Blackridge turned into a war zone. Raider troops poured out of dropships like locusts, their armored hides shining in the hot sky. The night was lit up by blasters. An explosion shook the old industrial area. The earth shook after that. With each step, Silas's exosuit shook windows and broke through raider lines with each swing of its steel fists. Plasma bolts burned its armor, but the machine stayed strong. Silas felt alive for the first time in years. Every time a piston fired, a bolt strained, or he took a breath, it was as if he had become one with the machine. Come on, you bastards, he yelled, and his voice echoed through the comms. You chose the wrong junkyard to raid. A raider lunged at them with its claws out. Silas punched it, and the creature flew into a wall, where stone and mortar fell around it. Another shot from above, but Silas swung a plasma cannon he had found on his shoulder, sending hot blasts through the enemy's chest. And on top of everything else, the fleet-foot steel and flame dragons against the raiders' armored shadows. Mechanic and commander through the chaos, Kellen came down like a storm. Her armor shone with dragonlight, and her sword glowed as it cut through the ranks of raiders with surgical precision. As she landed next to Silas's exosuit, her wings, which were part technology and part living flame, spread wide. For a second, the world seemed to stop. He had saved her life 16 years ago. Now, they were standing side by side, fighting for the same thing. You made this, she called, her voice sharp but full of awe. Inside the cockpit, Silas smiled as sweat ran down his temples. With dark tape, spit, and pure anger. You like it? Kellen cut a raider in half without stopping. I love it. They fought together, and there was a silent rhythm that held them together. Kellen knew what Silas would do next. Silas covered every blow she threw. It was like time had woven their fates into one long fight. And for the first time, Silas had the courage to hope. Perhaps this wasn't the end. It could have been the start. But hope was weak. Then the sky broke apart. A ship came out of the middle of the raider fleet. It was huge, terrifying, and covered in shadows that were darker than the void itself. The fire of suns stolen from dying worlds lit up its cannons. The warlord of the raiders had come. Silas stopped moving, and his breath caught in his throat. His machine suddenly felt small, like a toy in front of a giant. Even Kellen's sword seemed to lose its edge in the light. The warlord's voice echoed through the city and the heavens. Blackridge will fall, the dragon commander will bow down, and the mechanic, a break. A mean laugh. We'll finally break. The storm had arrived, and Silas knew that this fight would not only decide the city, but also the fate of everyone who was connected to the dragon fleet. The Raider warlord's ship was like a second moon over Blackridge, blocking out the stars. The hull was jagged and full of red veins of energy that pulsed, making it look like the ship was breathing. Every cannon and every blistering weapon bay hummed with a power that came from worlds that had been broken. The city was on fire and in a panic below. Kellen's fleet fought hard in the skies, with silver arcs of dragon-forged ships weaving through the black tide. Silas's exosuit walked through the rubble on the ground, smashing Raider soldiers aside like toys with its steel fists. Then the voice came back, deep, cruel, and loud enough to shake windows. Dragon Commander, Mechanic, if you dare, come forward. You both die tonight. Kellen stood next to the huge exosuit, her blade still glowing and her chest rising and falling with rage. She turned her head toward the big warship. He's calling us out, Silas swallowed, even though his throat was dry, and smiled. Well, I've always been up for a good suicide mission. Kellen's lips were half snarl and half smile. Stay close, I'll do the talking. You keep breaking things. Into the mouth they climbed, into a stolen Raider skiff, and dodged plasma fire as they went. Silas's exosuit barely fit in the hold, where it was held together with chains and clamps. The engines were groaning from the strain. Silas was in the cockpit, looking out at Kellen. As the huge docking bay of the warship opened in front of them, he wanted to say something more than jokes and sarcasm. But the words got stuck in his throat. Instead, he said quietly into the comm, I pulled you out of the fire 16 years ago. Now take a look at us. Going right back in. Kellen didn't turn round, but her voice was steady. And this time, I'm bringing you back out. The skiff hit the ground hard, and its ramp went down into the beast's belly. Raiders swarmed, their armor black as night and their eyes burning with hunger. Kellen was the first to move, his storm of steel and fire. Silas followed in the exosuit, and the footsteps of his machine sounded like thunder. They cut a path through the horde, step by brutal step, until the chamber shook. And then he showed up. The warlord, the Raider warlord, stepped out of the shadows, standing tall over his troops. His armor was a horrible mix of bone and metal, with jagged plates fused with living tissue. His eyes were glowing red, and his voice sounded like it had been through hundreds of years of war. You, he growled, pointing a clawed finger at Kellen, the last of the dragonblood, pretender to a throne that has long since turned to ash. He looked at Silas instead. And you, the mechanic no one remembers, a rat in the wreckage. How dare you stand next to her? Silas leaned forward in the cockpit, and his voice came through the speakers. Yes, the funny thing about rats is that they live. The warlord's laugh sounded like rocks grinding together. Then let's see if you can make it through this. The room exploded with a roar. Raiders came in from all sides. Kellen and Silas fought back to back, with the exosuit's cannons firing and her sword flashing arcs of light. The warlord, on the other hand, didn't want to just watch. He jumped into the fight with a huge swing of his arm, and his burning obsidian blade hit with the force of a landslide. Point of no return, the warlord's attack made the exosuit shake. Every hit dented armor, split plating, and sent sparks flying like fireworks. Silas clenched his teeth and his shirt was soaked with sweat. There were loud alarms going off in the cockpit. Kellen rushed in and her sword hit the warlord's. She moved like lightning, and every blow was fueled by her dragon blood. But the warlord was stronger, older, and full of hate and cruelty. He snarled, "Your people are gone," as he locked blades with her. You hold on to ghosts, and yet I'm still standing, she said, spitting fire from her lips. Silas hit the warlord's side with his exosuit's fist, sending the huge alien flying back. For a moment, the three of them moved in circles, making it hard to tell who was the predator and who was the prey. But Silas knew what was going on. The exosuit wasn't going to work for long. Pistons let out smoke, hydraulics let out fluid, and armor split along sharp seams. But he kept fighting. The decision the warlord drove his sword down, stabbing the arm of the exosuit. As controls died one by one, Silas screamed and sparks flew round him. The machine fell to its knees, and alarms went off. Kellen screamed, and her wings fled as she flew at the warlord. Their swords hit each other again, sending sparks flying like meteors. But Silas knew what he had to do. The power core of the suit was unstable, volatile, and barely held together. It was about to overload. If he set it off by hand, he could release enough energy to hurt the warlord badly or even destroy the ship's core. But he wouldn't make it. His hand was close to the failsafe. Then Kellen's voice came through his comm, rough and desperate. "Hey, Silas, don't stay with me." He had never heard her voice crack like that before. Not the commander, not the Dragonlord, but the girl he had saved once, begging him to stay with her. For a moment, the years between them disappeared. Silas laughed, both bitterly and softly. "Looks like this is where the forgotten mechanic gets remembered." He slammed the backup. Fire and as the exosuit blew up, a huge wave of energy hit the room, throwing raiders round like ragdolls and ripping steel from stone. The warlord staggered as his armor broke under the attack. Kellen used her wings to protect herself, and the force almost pulled her off the ground. The exosuit was gone when the light came back on. It was broken and smoking on the floor. Silas was lying in the wreckage, bleeding, broken, and barely breathing. The warlord screamed and fell to his knees. He was missing half of his armor and one arm, but his anger was stronger than ever. He raised his sword for the last blow. Kellen got him. She screamed so loudly that it shook the ship as she drove her sword through his chest. Fire burst from her lungs in a torrent of dragon flame. Before turning to ash and ruin, the warlord screamed and his body shook. There was silence. The raiders ran away, without a leader, like shadows before dawn. Their fleet broke up above, and Kellen's dragons took the lead until the sky was clear. The aftermath. Kellen knelt down next to Silas. His chest rose and fell slowly, and his eyes opened. "Still alive," he said with blood on his lips. "See, I told you. Rats live." Tears burned her eyes and ran down her cheeks, mixing with the ash. She put her hand on his and felt her scales warm against his broken skin. "You're not a rat," she said in a low voice. "You are the reason I'm still here, the reason we're all here." He stopped breathing. "I saved you from the fire 16 years ago. I guess it's only fair that you pull me out too." Kellen shook her head hard. "No, Silas, I'm not going to let you go. Not right now, not ever." As the ship fell apart around them, she picked him up and flew him out into the smoke and light of a city that had survived. The End Blackridge was rebuilding weeks later. The scars of the fire were still visible on its skyline, but hope was still alive in its ruins. The raiders were broken up and sent into the void. Silas sat outside his workshop with his body wrapped in bandages and one arm in a sling. He looked older, slower, but still alive. Kellen stood next to him, not as a commander or a legend, but as someone who owed him her life. Silas looked at the half-finished exosuit frame and said, "You know, this thing could use a lot more armor. Maybe this time, some real paint." Kellen crossed arms and smiled. "And maybe a mechanic who doesn't want to kill himself." He laughed, then winced in pain. "Don't make any promises." They stood there in silence for a moment, with the weight of battles fought and battles yet to come hanging between them. Then Kellen spoke in a low voice. "Silas, you're not forgotten. Not any more. Not ever." And in the distance, the rebuilt fleet shone in the sky, ready for the next storm. But for the first time in 16 years, Silas thought that maybe, just maybe, the fire hadn't come to kill him. It had come to make him into something better.